Greetings, brethren, throughout Laodicea, and welcome to our presentation today, where we will look at the 42 months in the Bible. Is it a time-setting trap? We'll do a case study and ask the question, do any of the 42 months of prophetic time periods mentioned in the books of Daniel and Revelation have a double application? That is, one historical and one yet in the future? One a day for a year and the other a literal 3.5 years sometime in the future? So we'll address this today. This came about in part due to the posting of a recent video by David Gates posted in YouTube on October 17, 2018. And in this video entitled, "Even at the Door," Pastor Gates had this urgent warning for Seventh-day Adventists to wake up and get ready. And certainly we need to hear that. But therein, he had a troubling prediction. He claimed that beginning in September 23, 2015, when the Pope addressed the joint U.S. Congress, he claims that the judgment of the living began at that time. So adding 3.5 years, he comes to the spring of 2019, and he claims that the General Conference at that time will disfellowship faithful Seventh-day Adventists who don't comply with their compliance document, and that probation will close for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Well, there's a number of things that are troubling about these conclusions, one of which is the claim of setting a time for a future event. And this video, at this point, this is November 27th, has received almost 200,000 views. So it's viral by Seventh-day Adventist standards. And it's met a response from various pastors and church leaders, including Mark Finley, the vice president of the General Conference. So there must be something behind this video that's causing concern. Their principal concern was the issue of time setting, and we'll address that. But another issue that nobody has addressed is what constitutes judgment for the living. And it's clear from this that Brother Gates does not understand what constitutes the judgment for the living, nor does Mark Finley or anybody else that addressed this video. In essence, we will be looking at that in another presentation, but the judgment for the living begins with the purification of the church, as specified in Ezekiel chapter 9, and Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. And this sealing of the 144,000, or this judgment that first begins in the house of God, must take place before the four winds of the Sunday law lets loose. Now, if you'd like a Bible study to confirm this evidence, please feel free to contact us at the end of this video, where we will be happy to share with you the evidences from the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy. So let's look at some of the texts that were shared regarding a warning against time setting, because clearly we don't want to follow into this trap. So I'll read here from Great Controversy, page 457. It reads, "The preaching of a definite time for the judgment in the giving of the first message was ordered by God. The computation of the prophetic periods on which that message was based, placing the close of the 2,300 days in the autumn of 1844, stands without impeachment. The repeated efforts to find new dates for the beginning and close of the prophetic periods, and the unsound reasoning necessary to sustain these positions, not only leads minds away from the present truth, but throws contempt upon all efforts to explain the prophecies. The more frequently a definite time is set for the second advent, and the more widely it is taught, the better it suits the purposes of Satan. After the time is past, he excites ridicule and contempt of its advocates, and thus casts reproach upon the great Advent movement of 1843 and 1844. So what happens if in the spring of 2019 that these things that Elder Gates predicted don't come to pass? Something to ponder and think about. Let's look at this passage from Early Writings, page 75, that indicates that the third angel's message is stronger than time. We'll read, "The Lord has shown me that the message of the third angel must go and be proclaimed to the scattered children of the Lord, but it must not be hung on time. I saw that some were getting a false excitement arising from preaching time. But the third angel's message is stronger than time can be. I saw that this message can stand on its own foundation and needs not time to strengthen it, and that it will go in mighty power and do its work, and will be cut short in righteousness. So the preaching of the third angel's message, especially as it's going to be repeated with power and force with the fourth angel of Revelation 18, does not need a future time event. And consider this passage to avoid speculations in regard to times and seasons. It reads, "The times and seasons God has put in his own power. And why has not God given us this knowledge? Because we would not make a right use of it if he did. A condition of things would result from this knowledge among our people that would greatly retard the work of God in preparing a people to stand in the great day that is to come. We are not to be engrossed with speculations in regard to the times and the seasons which God has not revealed. Jesus has told his disciples to watch, but not for definite time." Continuing on, his followers are to be in the position of those who are listening for the orders of their captain. They are to watch, wait, pray, and work as they approach the time for the coming of the Lord. But no one will be able to predict just when that time will come, for of that day and hour knoweth no man. You will not be able to say that he will come in 1, 2, or 5 years. Neither are you to put off his coming by stating that it may not be for 10 or 20 years. We are not to know the definite time either for the outpouring of the Holy Spirit or for the coming of Christ. So this coming for the close of probation for Seventh-day Adventist Church has no merit, and coming in the spring of 2019 has no merit based on these statements from the Spirit of prophecy. Because after the judgment first begins in the house of God, then will be outpouring of the Holy Spirit to give the loud cry after the church is purified. So this statement here, Review and Herald, March 22, 1892. So, with these evidences from the Spirit of prophecy, let's look at some examples of people falling into the trap of predicting a literal 3.5-year time period in the future. And these examples are probably not familiar to most Seventh-day Adventists. But to Davidians that study the shepherd's rod, these two examples are good for us to review and also for the world to be aware of, because these things are being repeated. The first example we'll look at is Florence Houteff, the wife of Victor Houteff, who made a false prediction of a literal 3.5 years that would began in November 55 and then ended in April 22, 1959, predicting the end or the purification of the church in the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. Well, of course, this came and passed and proved that she herself was a false prophet. Now, church leaders blame this on the teachings of Victor Houteff and the shepherd's rod, but this is utterly false, because this had nothing to do with the writings of Victor Houteff. It was solely on the authority of Florence Houteff. Some Davidians later, Norris Nosworthy and Mike Smithson, predicted a literal 3.5 months or years starting August 1990 and then ending on a date October 7, 1992, where they predicted Ezekiel 9 would take place. And then the third example is this recent one of Pastor David Gates predicting the period from September 23 to 2015, the beginning of the 3.5-year period that will end sometime in the spring of 2019. So he's, in essence, put himself into a time trap, claiming that this 3.5 years is going to end in the spring. So let's look at these cases. In the case of Florence Houteff, we were fortunately forewarned that there would be unsuspected foes who would attempt to deliver a knockout blow. And this comes from the writing White House Recruiter, page 33. This was published in 1951 by Victor Houteff, and it reads, "Everything that can be done against God's message of today will be done with even greater vengeance than was manifest against heaven's message in the days of Christ's first advent. For the devil knows that if he loses now, he loses forever, that he is to have no other chance. Unparalleled, therefore, is the urgency that every 11th hour church member now quickly and solidly brace himself against the enemy's effort to deliver a knockout blow. We must be alert, too, to realize that the blow is to come from surprisingly unsuspected foes, from professed friends of the gospel, who are no less pious than were the priests in Christ's day. And Davidians came to recognize that this first friend of the faith that would attempt to deliver a knockout blow was none other than Florence Houteff, the wife of Victor Houteff. So this is what she did. She took a publication called the Symbolic Code and she corrupted it. And in Volume 11, Number 1, published November 55, and then later Volume 11, Number 5, published in March 1956, she wrote the following. 1. That the fulfillment of the slaughter of Ezekiel 9 is immediately preceded by the 42-month Revelation 11:2, or 1,260 days, Revelation 11:3. As we approach the time of these events, more can be said about them, but for now the important point to be emphasized is that it is clear that we have already entered into the period of the 42 months. Symbolic Code, Volume 11, Number 1, November 1955. So here, Florence Houteff stepped into the trap of time setting by predicting that the 42 months would end in the spring of 1959. Of course, this failed and proved that she was a false prophet. Here's another confirmation. Moreover, since the promised Elijah is to be the last prophet to the church today, General Conference Special, page 23 and 24, and since he is come and gone, we can know that we are now in the 42 months, the 1,260 days of Revelation 11, when the two witnesses are to prophesy. So it turns out that she made these predictions on her own authority, and they were proven to be utterly false. But what was it that caused her interest, and that of many Davidians, was the idea that there was a future 3.5 years found in Revelation chapter 11, verses 2 and 3. So we're going to look at this in more detail, because it's the same type of thing that got Brother Gates to make his prediction about a 42 months. Now, Nosworthy-Smithson wrote letters, thousands of letters, the one on the left to the leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We're talking all the church leaders, union presidents, conference presidents, and many, many of the pastors, literally thousands of letters, warning that the date, October 7, 1992, would be the fulfillment of Ezekiel 9. And they furthermore sent these letters to all the leaders of the United States government, from the president on down to members of Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, and judges, warning them about this imminent purification of the church, signed off by the first contingent of Commandos for Christ, pre-11th hour studies. Well, you can imagine what reaction this caused amongst church leaders and leaders in the government. Probably perplexed them, of these strange prophesyings that came to pass. But one thing for sure is there's some indication that these were part of the responsibility, or part of the reason that the United States government laid siege on the Branch Davidian compound and showed up with an arrest warrant with helicopter gunships. Because why is it that they showed up to the Branch Davidians under David Koresh with all this military force? It's a perplexing question. Well, these letters probably have a reason, part of the responsibility that most people aren't aware of. So once again, this false time setting created quite a trouble that has implications far beyond its intended time period. So we come back to David Gates' recent video, Even at the Door. So once again, he predicted the beginning of this 3.5 year period based on the study of Daniel and Revelation, that it began when the Pope addressed the United States Congress in September 23, 2015. He also mentioned a papal encyclical on the environment entitled Laudato Si, in which he alleges that there was legislation pointing toward a day of rest or a national Sunday law. The troubling thing is he predicted this is when judgment for the living began, and obviously he has no understanding of what constitutes judgment for the living. That is, the separation of wheat and tares within the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the execution of Ezekiel 9, which must take place before the Sunday law blows. And there's a study on Revelation 7 where we can provide evidence for that. Please contact us at the information at the end of this video, and we'll be happy to send you that Bible study outline. He concluded that the end of the 3.5 years would come in the spring of 2019, and at that time the General Conference would begin to disfellowship faithful Seventh-day Adventists who don't comply with their compliance documents or policies, and that probation would close for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This is very unfortunate because not only is he entering into a time-setting trap, but he's also prophesying in regard to the judgment of the living for things he knows nothing about. So this is part of the reason that prompted our reply, is to address the danger of this information going out around the world through YouTube video. Now, it's important to understand the difference between time setting and understanding a time prophecy. So here's an example of interpreting a time period that is not time setting. And this refers to the 430 years of Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 4 to 6. An understanding of this time prophecy came from Shepherd's Rod, Volume 1, page 221. And at that time, it was looking back at a period of time that began, the 430 years were broken into two pieces, 390 years and 40 years. So the 390 years began in 1500 and ended around the year 1890. And then the 40 years added on top of that, the following away, concluded somewhere around the time of 1929, the year that the light from the judgment for the living and the sealing of the 144,000 came to Victor Houteff in the Shepherd's Rod. Now this was understood after the time passed, so it was not a prediction of a future date. So this is not a time setting. This is an inspired interpretation of a prophetic time period that Seventh-day Adventists have never addressed in any of their publications. They have no idea how this applies. So this is a distinct difference between time setting and interpreting a time period that happened in the past. So we want to come back to this question: is it possible that there is a 42-month time period, or a literal 3.5 years in the Bible, that will be fulfilled sometime in the near future? Obviously, there must be. This has been an interest amongst Davidians around the time that Brother Victor Houteff died in February 1955. He was revising the Timely Greeting, in which he was looking at the 42 months in Revelation chapter 11, verses 2 and 3, and recognized that there's a future application. Although he never wrote or published anything regarding it, it was something that Davidians were very interested in, and it led Florence Houteff, his wife, to come up with her false time-setting prediction and an attempted knockout blow, as we addressed earlier. However, Seventh-day Adventists have also recognized that some of the 42-month periods mentioned in the Bible, in the books of Daniel and Revelation, have a future application, and this was the basis that Elder Gates came to his conclusion. So let's look at those verses and see which ones have a future application. So the 42 months, or 3.5 years, is mentioned 7 times in the Bible. Let's go to those verses and just read through them. Daniel 7, verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a time, and times, and the dividing of time. Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be fulfilled. Number 3, by the court which is without the temple leave out, measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. Revelation chapter 11, verse 2. Number 4, and I will give power unto my 2 witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the 2 olive trees and the 2 candlesticks standing before the God of the earth. Revelation 11, verses 3 and 4. Number 5, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Revelation 12, verse 6. Example 6, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, unto a place where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. Revelation 12, verse 14. And the last example, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things, and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Revelation 13, verses 5 to 7. So here's the 7 cases in the Bible where we have a 42-month time period. And of course we know that these are equivalent terms, that time, times, and half a time, or dividing time, is equal to 3.5 years, which is equal to 42 months, 12 months per year, which is equal to 1,260 days, calculated by 30 days per month times 42. So these are the time periods that we're referring to. So let's do a brief summary of each verse and analyze, is it historical, or is there a future application, or a double application? Daniel 7:25 we'll find is purely historical. Now we're going to go into each one of these in more detail, but this is just the overview summary to jog your thinking and get you thinking about these potential for a future 42 months. And of course that period, the literal, or the day for a year at 1260 years, began in 538, ended in 1798 BC. And it was based on the day for a year time prophecy in Ezekiel 4:6. Daniel 12, verse 7, turns out it has a future application. After the king of the north, from Daniel 11:45, falls. This hasn't happened yet. Revelation 11:2, the treading down of the city, or church, by the Gentiles for 42 months has not been completed. Revelation 11:3, the church shall prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth, representing troublous times, which concludes with Ezekiel 9, which hasn't happened yet. Revelation 12:6, the woman, referring to Seventh-day Adventist Church, flees into the wilderness after 1798 and returns after a latter-day kingdom is established, which hasn't happened yet. Revelation 12:14, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is yet to return from her atypical sojourn among the Gentile nations. And Revelation 13:5, the deadly wound in verse 3 was healed in 1929 with the Lateran Treaty, and the power was given to the leopard-like beast, the first beast in Revelation 13, for a period of 42 months. So we see here that there are several cases where there's a future application. We're going to look at the first 2 examples, Daniel 7:25 and Daniel 12, verse 7, in this presentation. The others we will reserve for future presentations. So let's focus on Daniel 7:25. It reads, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand for a time and times and the dividing of time. Now we know that this power, this little horned head that would rise up and speak against the Most High, was none other than the papal power, the papacy. And he would seek to change times and laws, not only the day of worship from Sabbath to the pagan day of Sunday, but also the beginning of the year, The Hebrew year began in the spring, and he changed it to a Roman calendar under Pope Gregory. Also, the introduction of pagan holidays such as Easter and Christmas. And the time of the day. We know in the Bible that the day day goes from sundown to sundown, but the Roman time is from the day begins at midnight, in the middle of the night. So these are clearly examples of the papacy changing times of laws that were purely historical, a fulfillment of a 1260-year time period during the Dark Ages. No dispute. But let's look at Daniel chapter 12, verse 7. When the king of the north comes to his end, the king of the north referring back to Daniel chapter 11. And the verse reads, "And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, and he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and a half. And when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be fulfilled." We're emphasizing on the end of that verse, when all these things shall be fulfilled. And it's referring back to the things that are taking place in Daniel, the latter verses of Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 to 45. Now, Seventh-day Adventists have had real trouble interpreting these verses. There's a lot of controversy and division amongst the ranks, and no consensus whatsoever. It turns out that the answer is found in the writings of the Shepherd's Rod. And the key is to identify who this king of the north is, because when he comes to his end, then as we move into Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, Michael's going to stand up and deliver his people. This hasn't happened yet. So we see that this time period, a 3.5-year time period, still hasn't been fulfilled. So the key here is to identify the king of the north and the king of the south. And here's the answer from the Shepherd's Rod. The simple and positive way not to lose sight of the identity of these two kings, found in Revelation chapter 11, found in Daniel chapter 11, is to let the pen of prophecy trace on the map of history the successive rulers of Egypt and Palestine. For the titles of the kings who conquered and who lost these ancient countries are chronologued in this prophetic chapter to preserve the identity and to expose the evil intents of both the king of the south and the king of the north. Remember now, to begin with, the king of the south rules the glorious land, Palestine, along with Egypt, and the king of the north takes the glorious land twice, Daniel 11, verse 16 and verse 41. If he takes it twice, then he must have lost it once. Consequently, both kings ruled it twice and lost it twice. But the king of the north, the last to rule it, rules it in the time of the end, the time many run to and fro, and the time knowledge has increased, Daniel 12, verse 4, our time. Mark this carefully, for these transactions of the land provide the key to the identity of these kings from the time of Alexander's death to our time. Continuing on, the angel emphatically declared that the kings to rule Palestine together with Egypt were to be as follows. First, the king of the south, Ptolemy. Second, the king of the north, pagan Rome. Third, the king of the south, Turkey. Fourth, the king of the north, England. Here, in the following 25 pages, are the details of prophecy correlated with history. Track number 12, pages 63 and 64. Now, to look at all of this evidence in greater detail, please request a copy of this track at the end of this video, and we'll be happy to send you a copy of this original that provides all the evidence from the Bible, Spirit of Prophecy, and the records of history. So what things shall be finished? In Daniel 12, verse 7. We'll read from Timely Greetings, Volume 2, number 42, page 27. This is part of the writings of the original Shepherd's Rod. The only portion of Daniel 11 yet to be fulfilled in this verse, the last of the chapter, and since these prophecies are made to be understood only when they are being fulfilled or after fulfillment, verse 25 is not as clear as we should like to have it. Consequently, concerning the place of his tabernacles and his end, Also, as to whether another Christian power shall inherit the title King of the North before verse 45 is fulfilled, only time itself will positively portray the whole truth. So who's the King of the North described in Daniel chapter 11, verses 40 to 44? Well, Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Number 7, page 5 makes this clear. Next, to learn the years of the time of the end began, and who the king of the south and who the king of the north are, all you need to know is when such a clash began, and who in the time of the end ceded Egypt and Palestine to an enemy power, and what power as a result shrunk during the time of the end, and what power has expanded. There is but one answer, and that is, while the Ottoman Empire has been shrinking since AD 1669, the British Empire has been expanding, and it today rules Egypt and Palestine. Hence, today Turkey is king of the south, and Great Britain the king of the north. And according to this prophetic conflict, the time of the end started at the beginning of the 18th century. So who's this other Christian power that's to inherit the title of the king of the north? Since the 1940s, after World War II, Britain has steadily been losing power and influence around the world. So who has stepped up in its place to rule over by proxy the Promised Land, Palestine, and Egypt? Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Number 42, page 27. This was published in 1949. The only portion of Daniel 11 yet to be fulfilled in this verse, the last of the chapter, and since these prophecies are made to be understood only when they are being fulfilled or after fulfillment, verse 45 is not as clear as we should like to have it. Consequently, concerning the place of his tabernacles and his end, also as to whether another Christian power shall inherit the title King of the North before verse 45, only time itself will positively portray the whole truth. So as we look forward, after World War II, England steadily began to lose its power and influence over the Middle East. And who stepped up in its place? Well, the nation of Israel, established in 1948 and supported behind the United States of America. So when does this King of the North, the latest Christian power, America, come to its end? In Daniel 11:45. According to Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Number 7, page 10, published in 1948. At the time, that is, the time of the King of the North comes to his end, and none help him, shall Michael stand, and at the same time there shall be a trouble such as never was even to that very time. Only God's people who have their names written in the book will be delivered. So this event, when King of the North falls in Daniel 11:45, Israel, backed up by the United States, America, that's when God will deliver his people, the 144,000. So here's a summary of Daniel 12, verse 7. Since the time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, Daniel 12:1, has yet to take place, verse 7 must have another application in addition to the historical 1260 years that occurred from 538 to 1798 AD. Thus, there must be a literal 3.5-year period of time which ends with the events in Daniel 11:45. These are briefly summarized as follows. The emerging king of the north comes to an end, and none shall help him. This power, modern-day Assyria, will be involved in a gigantic war. Tract 14, page 22. The English-speaking Protestant nations identified as modern-day Assyria, Tract 14, page 34, and Timely Greetings, Volume 1, number 23, page 6, Nineveh, the capital of Syria, is anotypically represented by America, who will lead out to enforce the mark of the beast while other nations are to follow. Sixth Testimony, page 18 and page 395. At that time, Jesus will deliver the saints, the 144,000, from this time of trouble. Daniel 12:1. And then the 42-month of verse 7 concludes. So to understand more about this gigantic war that will be centered around the Middle East, and Palestine and the fall of the King of the North, the United States, please request copies of this literature because this is where this information is found. Tract number 12, tract number 14 of the Shepherd's Rod, and Timely Greetings, Volume 2, Numbers 7 and 42. This concludes this part of the 42 months. We'll continue in future studies on the part 2. We'll look at Revelation 11, verse 2, the treading down of the city of the church by the Gentiles for 42 months. Turns out this hasn't been completed yet. And coupled with Revelation 11, verse 3, the church shall prophesy 1260 days clothed in sackcloth during troublous times, which concludes with the earthquake of Revelation 11:13, which represents purification of church, Ezekiel 9. Part 3, we will look at the 2 verses in Revelation 12. Verse 6, the woman, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, flees in the wilderness after 1798 and returns after a latter-day kingdom is established in the Promised Land, in Palestine. In verse 14, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has yet to return from an atypical sojourn among the Gentile nations. In the last part, part 4, we'll look at Revelation 13:5, the deadly wound, verse 3, that was healed by the Lateran Treaty in 1939. Powers to be given to this leopard-like beast, the first beast of Revelation 13, verses 1 to 10, will be for a period of 42 months. So we'll look at those in more detail in future presentations. So please subscribe to this channel and click the bell icon so that you can be updated when these presentations are released. So this concludes our presentation today. If you have any further questions, comments on this subject, please subscribe to this YouTube channel for future updates. Or request copies of the original Shepherd's Rod tract literature and the study outline on the future application of a literal 42 months for your own study and investigation, also to learn more about what constitutes the judgment for the living, as specified in Ezekiel chapter 9 and also Malachi chapter 3, verses 1 to 3. This purification that first begins at the house of God, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that must take place before the Sunday law occurs. So if you aren't aware of this, please request the information and look at the evidences from the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy. Feel free to contact us anytime. Our email, upa5453@gmail.com, or telephone us at 860-798-3672, or better yet, visit our website, www.shepherds-rod-speaks.org, and we'd be happy to provide you any information regarding this most important subject of the 42 months and its future application. We thank you for your time. May God bless your search for truth as for hidden treasure. Godspeed.